What's up everybody, and welcome to a new video. And in this video we're gonna continue to go over my nodes for the Explorer. So in the previous video we've covered the workspace nodes, so now let's get to the purpose, i.e. what is the Explorer actually used for. Namely, it's to browse and manage the files and folders of the project. So the files, they are depicted with these icons here based on what file type they are. So for example, this here is a markdown file, and then you have this icon. Or for example, here in this debugger folder, there are a bunch of Python files, and here the icon looks like this. And just as a side note, your icons might look different, but that's just because I have installed this material icon theme here. Okay, so that are the files. So the folders then are simply depicted with these arrows here. And you can click them to toggle showing the files inside of the respective folder. Okay, so that's for browsing. And now with respect to managing the files, I want to cover these 3 points here. The first one is clicking. So if you single click a file, then you don't open the file, but instead you open a preview. And this is indicated here by these italics. And this is useful if you just want to quickly inspect different files without opening a bunch of different files. So if you don't want that behavior, then you can go here to the overflow menu, and then here toggle this setting here of enable preview editors. So now if I click or single click a file, it actually opens. Okay, however, I like this behavior, so let's toggle it on again. And in that case, if you have the setting toggled on, the way that you open a file is then simply by double clicking. So if I double click, then there here are no italics. And if I click here or single click the next file, then you can see this basic functionality that p.5 stays open, while here we now have a preview. And one alternative way is to simply start editing in the file. So if I here add a new line, then you can see it's also not italics anymore, and now this file is opened. Okay, so that are the main points for clicking, and here I also have some side notes. The first side note is about multi-selection. So if you want to select multiple files, therefore you can use, for example, Control. So if you want to select individual files, simply hold Control and then select then the files. So this, for example, this and this one. So now I've selected those three files. Or if you want to select a range of files, then you can use Shift. So simply select the first file, hold Shift, and then select the last file that you want to select. So now I have selected those 3 files here. Okay, so that's multi-selection. And then the next one is, the next side note is that you can drag and drop the files and folders around. So for example, if I wanted to put this license file here into this MISC folder, then you can simply hold that and put it into this folder. And if you again want to put it into the root, simply drag it over here. Okay, so those were the side notes. And with that we have covered clicking. So now let's get to the toolbar. Namely here, if you hover over the Explorer, then you get here this toolbar. And here you can create a new file, a new folder, refresh the Explorer, or the last option that you have here is collapse folders. So for example, if you have a bunch of folders open, then it can look a little bit confusing here on the Explorer, and it's then also a little bit cumbersome to individually close all those folders, and therefore you can simply then collapse all the folders with this button. And now everything looks clean again. Okay, so then the last point that I want to mention is the context menu. So here, if you right click a file, then you have the usual options. For example, cut, copy, rename, or delete. However, some options that are, in my opinion, useful is here this reveal, for example, this reveal in File Explorer. So this simply opens the location of the file in your native Explorer. So that's the first one. And the second one that I want to show is here this copy path and copy relative path. So if I copy the absolute path, And then here, if I paste it in, this way then you can see how you can easily get the path of a file. Okay, so those were now the main points that I wanted to cover with respect to the purpose of the Explorer. Okay, so now let's get to the next point, which are the different views. And they simply provide additional ways of interacting with the files. And the first one is this Open Editors view. And this shows the opened editors ordered by group. So therefore, let me just create another group by dragging this file over here. So now we have here two groups, and let's add another file to this group. And here, as you can see, then the active file or the currently active file is highlighted here. So currently the my library code file is active. If I select the license, then this is highlighted. If I go to basic functionality, then that is highlighted. And an example use case for this Open Editors view is if you don't want to use these tabs here. So to turn them off, simply open the settings and then search for Show Tabs. And then here select the option None. So then the tabs are not shown anymore. And now the way that you can navigate these files is with the Open Editors view. So here, if I open my library code.py, or if I want to open the basic functionality.py file, then you can do that with the Open Editors view. But now let me turn the tabs on again. So multiple. And now let's talk about the toolbar here. So if you hover over the Open Editors view, then you have here these buttons to create a new file. Then here to toggle between vertical and horizontal editor layout. So if I click that, we get this horizontal layout. And if we click it again, we have our vertical. Then you have a button to save all the files, and then a button to close all the editors. And then when you hover over a group here, you also have a toolbar. And here you can then save all in the group or close all files of the group. So if I close that, then this group on the right is closed. And that are already all the notes that I wanted to cover with respect to the Open Editors view. Okay, so then next is the outline view. And the outline view shows the symbol tree of the currently active file. So for example, for Markdown files, it shows the headings. So this could be used as a table of contents, for example. And for Python files, it shows, for example, the variables, functions, or classes. And if you click here such a symbol, then if you single click it, then the respective line in the file gets highlighted. So if I click string, this line is highlighted. If I click on subtract, then it's highlighted here. And if you double click a symbol, then VS Code jumps into the file and highlights everything that belongs to that symbol. So for example, if I click double click add, then it highlights the whole function. If I double click my class, then it highlights the whole class. Okay, so then here you also have a toolbar. So here you can expand and collapse all. And then here in the overflow menu, you have different options. The first one is to follow the cursor. So if I toggle this on, then what happens is that the respective symbol gets highlighted here based on the cursor position. So if I put the cursor on string, then string is highlighted. If I put it on subtract, then subtract is highlighted. If I put it on my class, then my class is highlighted. Okay, so let's turn it off again. And then the second option is here filter on type. And this is related to the search within views functionality, which we've covered when we talked about the activity bar. So here in the side notes, there is the search within views functionality. So if you don't know what that is, then I will put the link to that into the video description. Okay, so let's go back to our outline view here. So now just to show you that, let me open that view. So press Ctrl, Alt, and F. And then here we have this filter option. And if I simply here toggle this off, then you can see that it's now toggled off. If I toggle it on, it's toggled on again. Okay, so let's close that. And then lastly, you have here different sort by options. So you can sort by position, the symbols by position, so based on how they appear in the file. So the first symbol is the string, that's why it's listed first, and then add, and so on. And then you can sort by name, so this sorts this alphabetically. And then the last option that you have is sort by category. So this sorts then based the symbols based on the different categories. So here are classes, functions, and variables. And that's the toolbar. So let's set this to position again. And now just one last thing that I want to mention is the side note here, which says that errors and warnings are also shown, but not infos. So therefore, let's go back to this outline view, .py file. And here let's uncomment these lines. And then here you can see that this error here is depicted, and as well as this warning here. However, this info is not depicted. And here, just a side note, for this info you would need a spell checker extension. Okay, so let's comment this out again. And then let's go back to our notes. And those were basically already all the notes that I want to mention with respect to the outline view. Okay, so the next is the timeline view. And the timeline view visualizes time series events. So for example, file saves and git commits. And the timeline view will be covered in more detail in another video, namely under source control, then here inspecting the commit history, and then here alternatively via timeline view of the Explorer. So I will put a link to the video into the video description. Okay, so let's close this here again. And now with that, we've covered all the points that I wanted to cover with respect to the different views. Okay, so now let's get to the side notes. And the first one is about hidden files and folders. Namely, by default, VS Code hides some specific files and folders. And to see which ones, open the settings and here search for files exclude. So here are the files and folders that are excluded by default. So for example, .git folders. And to show you that, let me open, for example, here this source control folder. And then here the diff editor. Here you can see there's no .git folder. However, if I open this diff editor here in the File Explorer, then you can see there's actually a .git folder. But since it is listed here, it's not shown in the Explorer in VS Code. And here's then a button with which you can add your own patterns. Therefore, you would need to use those globe patterns here. So those patterns here. So now to show you how that works, let's exclude, for example, markdown files. So here click this button, and then to exclude markdown files, you would simply then say asterisk and then .md. So now if you look here at this notes.md file, if I add this pattern, this will not be shown anymore. And there's however one exception. If a markdown file is opened in the editor, then it's actually also shown in the Explorer. So if I go to notes.md, for example, again, then it's here shown. And if I go back to settings, then it's not shown again. Okay, so this is how files exclude work. So now let me remove this pattern here again, and then close the settings. And that are already all the notes that I want to mention with respect to hidden files and folders. Okay, so now let's get to the last side note, which is that you can drag and drop or copy paste files from outside of VS Code into the Explorer. So to show you what I mean by that, let's collapse all these folders here and let's make the window a little bit smaller. So here I have this test.python file, and if I simply drag this into the Explorer, then you can see that it gets copied into the Explorer. And that's already the last note. So with that, we've now covered all the notes that I wanted to cover with respect to the Explorer. So then in the next video, we're going to go over the notes for search. So thanks for watching, and hopefully I will see you in the next video.